All right, welcome to the REC Tech Bits. My name is Heather Lynn Sparrow. I'm the Director of Photography of True Kids One. And today we're going to learn about Photoshop and GIMP basics. TrueKids1.org is, oh, look at that. My screen sharing is not allowing me to change my slides now. Interesting. Thank you for your patience, class, while we're figuring this out. Yes, the screen is locked completely now. There we go. Okay. So our mission at True Kids One is to inspire K through 12 students to create, communicate, and collaborate in the digital age. Oh, yes. It's interesting that it's not allowing me to, okay, there we go. Our programs are in school, after school, and out of school programming district-wide. We, like I said, teach K through sometimes even college level students technology. So today we're going to get into the wonderful world of Photoshop and GIMP basics. So first things first, Photoshop versus GIMP. So first of all, we're starting out in this slide. I have an actual link to the free trial of Adobe Photoshop. I also have a link to gimp.org and downloads. So some things to remember. GIMP is a free image editing software, whereas Photoshop is a paid image editing software. GIMP and Photoshop both contain numerous plugins, but Photoshop plugins are designed by famous photo brands like Phase One, Kodak, and more. GIMP, on the other hand, contains fewer tools, while Photoshop contains a lot of tools. Now, don't let that distract you from the fact that GIMP, in fact, is free. And when we live here in New Mexico and lots of places, having a monthly subscription fee isn't really attainable. The good news is UNM does provide free Adobe Suite if you are attending school there. So if you choose to go to school, you can find a way to have free Adobe Photoshop. But GIMP is free all the time. So what I'm going to talk about next is how to, look at that, the pros and cons of both GIMP and Photoshop, because sometimes it's hard to decide. They're both very powerful and customizable tools that help build skills that translate into professional tools. However, the con about GIMP is that it's a little bit harder to learn. And they call Photoshop a simpler app. I wouldn't call either of them a simple app. These apps are specifically designed for photo editing, for graphic design, for making brochures, business cards, and they're all great tools if you're trying to start up your own business here in New Mexico and you're on a budget. GIMP is great for that. So don't be worried about the steeper learning curve because it's free. And all the time that you would spend learning GIMP versus Photoshop is the time invested in yourself, and you can customize GIMP, which is really interesting to work exactly the way you want it to. So bottom line, it's a great choice for students and teachers with needs beyond simple tweaking, cropping, and color correction. And again, it says requires significant self-directed learning, and that's true. I'm not going to pretend that it's not hard to learn. It really is. Woo! Look at this thing. Okay, so Photoshop, pros for Photoshop, also very powerful, customizable, helps you build skills that translate into professional tools. Photoshop is a professional app. It is used by people who are getting paid to make graphic design, to edit photos, to edit film. The con, it has a monthly fee. I didn't write all the cons, but there's more. Unfortunately, if you don't have a computer that can take the updates or an operating system that's much older than the updates, things can become complicated in using Photoshop in that the operating systems stop working together. Sometimes you'll have to download an older operating system for your computer, but if it's online, it's going to try to update your computer and consistently try to convince you to up your subscription. Right now, Adobe Photoshop runs about $20 a month. Let me take a look if I can. Well, we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so like I said, the con is the monthly fee, but also if you end up stopping using Adobe Photoshop and you've uploaded your images to the cloud, it's going to be really hard to retrieve your images and open up another version of Photoshop and use it. Luckily, if you save your images as JPEGs, you can open them up in GIMP and work on them there. So those are the pros and cons of GIMP and Photoshop. And either way, whatever you choose, you have to choose what's right for you. But free is always fun. And that includes if you go to UNM, you do get the Adobe suite for free. So moving on. Okay, so let's talk about how we get media from your phone or your professional camera to your computer. I want to see if I can, oh, look at that. Oh my goodness, I've gone through all of my slides all at once. How do we go back? There we go. Okay. I'm just going to try to open up my tabs now. There we are. Okay, super. So one of the things that I want to tell you about is downloading. Before we get to transferring the photo into the program, I want to talk for a second about downloading. Downloading can be tricky, and many people will bait and switch you to download something on your computer that actually might give you a virus and harm your computer, or they'll try to sell you something, or they'll try to embed things like cookies into your computer. If you decide you are going to download the free app, this is the site and the only site you should ever download it from. It's a .org address, so you know gimp.org downloads. The cover page looks like this. And when you go in, if you have a Mac, you will click here. If you have Microsoft Windows, you will click here. And those will give you the most recent free versions of GIMP. It's not a trial, it's the actual version. So you select one of these that matches your computer, and you can find out information about your computer. If you're on a Mac, you click the Apple, you say about this Mac, and then you're able to see what version. Are you able to see there my macOS Monterey version? Students, can you see that? Okay, cool. So this tells you what kind of computer you have and the version. As you can see here, 12.3 is the operating system. It tells you that it's an Apple M1 Pro, which means that it's an Apple that you're going to download, okay? So once you click on that, then it will download and ask you to open GIMP. Okay, so that part is pretty straightforward. I want you to know that once you download the information, that GIMP has a whole host of user manual, tutorials, books. Here's a whole group of tutorials, beginner, logos, circle-shaped images. These are all things that you can utilize for free to do things like make your business cards, make your brochures. If you're starting a business and you have a low overhead for startup, these are all amazing things and free tutorials with people just like me showing you how to do it. Here's another page called GIMP Quickies. These are when you're feeling frustrated and you don't have an hour to spend. They give you a quick and dirty version of, hey, here's how you change the size of something. Here's how you do these things. So there's really a wealth of information. And again, is it a lot of investment of time? You bet. But if you're starting a business and you want to do something and save money, I think it's a worthy investment of time to learn it. Okay. So now that you've seen that, let's go back to our, let's see. Can you see this new Google tab that I've opened? Super. Okay. So real quick before I switch back to, I want to show you where you can access Adobe. So Adobe's huge. All you have to do is type into your browser, Adobe. It will give you the official site. It will wow you with all the most amazing things. You can start a free trial. That's for 7 days, but not without entering your credit card information. So remember, you can go ahead and try it, but after 7 days, they are going to charge you a monthly fee. You can get smaller versions if you are only looking to do maybe Photoshop and Lightroom. If you're just working with photos, you can get a photography plan, but generally it runs you about $20 a month. The pro about Adobe that I will say is that they do have a very robust online education system. And with your membership, you do get the opportunity to have all of those things for that paid membership also. So that's a possibility too. Okay, so moving back. So we've covered the pros and cons of Photoshop. And again, just so you know, right here is where you can download. These are clickable for you to download either of those things. So let's get back to what you need, okay? Space, and a lot of it. When we get into things like Photoshop and GIMP, it takes up a tremendous amount of space on our computer. And if we don't have a computer with a lot of processing space, you will definitely need a hard drive to hold these files. The more that you edit and the more layers that you use, the more space you're going to need. So there's really two kinds of external drives that we use. And one is just the HDD hard drive disk. It's less expensive, it's slower, and it's good for photos. Now, a lot of people do like to use thumb drives. They have tiny ones these days that have some space. And if you're on a budget, you can do that. But you always want to have a backup. And so you might be saving this in the cloud or on your computer, but having a backup is important because if your hard drive was to crash or something was to happen, you definitely want to be able to have a backup. And the beauty of having a plug-in hard drive is that you can unplug it and hand it to another team member and have them work on the same project. So it's versatile in that way. The other hard drive is a solid state drive. It's definitely more expensive. And what solid state means is that the parts inside the hard drive are actually solid and they're not spinning. So that way they last a lot longer. They are super fast and they're great for editing things like video or really large photo files. If we're doing something like a logo, a thumb drive or something more, reasonably priced is totally awesome. If you're trying to do video or something like that, having a bigger hard drive is a much better idea because then it won't take so long to download those images or the video files once you're done. Okay, so last thing about hard drives that most people don't know is that the shelf life of a hard drive is about 5 years. So when we're talking about backing up your information, it's really important to let everyone know that in 5 years, your hard drive might not have the information. And what's more is that you should never take your hard drive and put it next to a magnet. That includes speakers, that includes credit cards, now that the hard drives are getting smaller and smaller, anything that has a magnet puts your hard drive at risk for erasing itself. So for instance, that also goes for SD cards. When you've shot something and you pull the SD card out, the last place you want to put it is in your wallet, because the magnet strips in your actual driver's license and credit cards could in fact erase everything that you have on the card. So make sure that you back things up on your hard drive, and remember that in 5 years, those digital images could disappear, which is why I always loved shooting film, because 100 years later, we still have negatives, but the hard drives will not last. So make sure to back everything up. All right, moving into the good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Photoshop. Here we go. Okay. And what we're going to do today is have some fun working on an image, because I love photography. And so we're going to start there. So as you can see, I have this image. When I'm teaching in public schools, I teach a lot about media literacy, representation and identity, and we work on self-portraits. So I have each of the students select a self-portrait that's made by another famous artist, and then work their way into reproducing that very image using Photoshop and the cameras and the tools that we have. So we're going to work on this image today, but before we get too far, I'm going to start with the basics of how do you open up an image in Photoshop. So let's get started. So now that we have Photoshop open, I'm going to direct you here to all the top tabs. Most apps, not only in the Adobe suite, but in general, always will have tabs on the top and tools on the side that coordinate. So although it says File, Edit, Image, Layer, Type, most of these editing tools that you see here in this selection are the exact same tools that you can use over here. And what's more exciting is that the further you get into Photoshop, you can even learn key commands to make these same adjustments. So Photoshop has about 3 to 4 different ways to achieve the same thing, depending on how you like your workspace. And as you go forward, you can customize your workspace to fit the things that you're doing. So right now, the workspace that I'm in is just the general workspace. They also have photography workspace, video workspace, but this is general. So starting with the tabs across the top, you're going to click on File, and what you see is New and Open. So let's start with New. When you click on the New tab, it gives you a preference window. Ah, we love choices. So what's really cool about Adobe Suite is that they have a tremendous amount of templates that you can use for free. So you can see here that I just selected a couple of random templates just to see. They have brochures, they have logo templates, they have reports. I mean, it is endless, the amount of templates. So that's the other advantage of having Photoshop, is that you have the opportunity to use their pre-made templates. And so if you're trying to make a business logo, get your branding together, that's one way that you can achieve that. So here you see the different sizes in paper. You can make a custom size or a default Photoshop size. On the right-hand side in Photoshop is normally where you're going to do all of your customizing of things. So you can see here that this starts with the title. Now, naming files. Why does it matter? Well, I'm about to tell you. Many people have made images, put them on their computer somewhere, and when you go to find them, where did they go? Which hard drive are they on? When I title anything that I make, I start first with the year, then followed by an underscore. We like to use the underscore because everything in between the underscore, then when you type into your search engine, will be able to come up and help you find the file. So first the year, then the month, which of course is 3. And then what is it that you're doing? Let's say we're going to do a logo. So we're going to give it the logo name. And then moving forward, who are we doing the logo for? Well, let's say True Kids 1. Oops. Let's get that on there. True Kids 1. And then any other information that goes after that can be more about the people, more about the job, the client. And then when you go into your search engine and you can't figure out where you've put your file, this will help you find it every single time. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create this file on an 8.5 by 11 paper. And as you can see, it brings that up for us, and that's wonderful. So let's move around the screen just a little bit. So we know that we've covered all of the different tabs here on the top. And when I say covered, I don't mean explained, just you know where they are. On the left-hand side are all of the different tools available for us to work with this. On the right-hand side, we see the history. This is where every single move that we make is logged. So in case we'd like to go back, we can. For instance, as we move our way down here, these are our layers, meaning every move that we make, which is in combination with the history, will be recorded here on the history, but also exist here on the layers. Let me show you. Every time we open Photoshop, the first thing that we want to do to keep our files safe is make a second layer. As you can see here, very clearly, there's a lock. And the reason why it's locked is to allow you to not ruin your file. And I'll explain that when we get into the photographs. Obviously, this is just a blank slate. But imagining that it was a photo or anything else, or even this, we're going to go up into our tabs to layer, which is the 4th over, open up this menu and go to duplicate. So we duplicate the layer, and here is where you can name it. For right now, we're just not going to name it so that I can show you. Now look what's happened. In the history, we see that Adobe has gone ahead and duplicated the layer. And then we go down here to the layers, and sure enough, there it is again. When I open up a file, I just out of habit try to duplicate the layer 3 times. What that allows me to do is work on multiple layers at a time. And if I don't particularly care for what I've done, I can simply just delete that layer. Now, this is just an overview, and I'm going to demonstrate all the things that I'm talking about right now when we move to the photographs. So you can see here in the history, now we have a clear history of everything that we've done. What's really neat about the history is that if you choose that you don't care for what's happened, if you take a look on the right-hand side, let me pull this up for you a little bit. You see here, these are all of our layers. If I think, oh, I didn't really like that move that I did last time, I can go back one in the history. And if you watch on the right-hand corner where the layers are, you'll see that layer disappear. And then I'll go back in the history one more and another layer disappears. So for instance, say you've made an edit and you don't really care for it, you can just simply go back and start from that place. Okay, and you can see that these are grayed out. If you change your mind, go back. And the way to see the history, sometimes when you open up Photoshop, you won't necessarily see all these things. So back to the tabs again. If you were to click on Window here, you can see Arrange, Workspace, And although this feels incredibly overwhelming, it's really quite easy to go through the windows and say, you see the things that are checked here are the things that open up these little windows. So for instance, you can see I have history checked here. If I uncheck it, the history disappears. Now, why would that even be worthwhile? I'll tell you. If you're working on a large project and you're trying to edit and you have the history window open, going to Window tab, scrolling down to the history and clicking it on again, if this entire window was taken up, you might not want these things in your way so that you have more room to edit and see. And so again, that's the way to make things disappear or not disappear. And like I said earlier, Photoshop has many different ways to achieve that. So take a look here. You see these little arrows? This also can collapse the history window. Most times in Adobe suites, anything that has a triangle either offers you more or makes something collapse back into itself. So let's go back to the window again and open up the history. Okay, so now you see that we've made all these layers. You see that we have these background copies. The last thing I'm going to tell you before we actually move into making the images is that in Photoshop, whatever layer you are clicked on is the layer that you're working on. Whatever layer you click on is the layer you are working on. So as you can see, I'm clicking on different layers here to demonstrate that, and I'm about to show you how that works. So for instance, if I were to click on background copy 2 and go in to my brush, let's just choose a brush, for instance. So here are all the different tools that we talked about. What's fantastic is, as you can see, as you hover over these, they tell you exactly what they are. And the great news is, let me just for fun switch over to GIMP here right now. As you can see, I've pulled over a logo from True Kids 1. And this is GIMP, everyone, not Photoshop, but look at how similar it is. You can see my Photoshop behind GIMP. You see I'm moving this around. Here we are. So very, very similar. Tools on the left-hand side. Here's the tools here in GIMP. Similar structure. This is a little bit different. These are the brush sizes, but I've selected brush just like I have in Photoshop. A little bit different, but not so much. The brush preferences are on the right-hand side in GIMP. The brush preferences are over here in Photoshop. Do they work the same? Pretty much, pretty much. And right here in GIMP, this is where all of our layers are. So you can see that it's pretty close to working the same. So back to Photoshop. And we're talking about layers. The layer you click on is the layer that you're editing. And that's so important. So now we've got this beautiful brush. And we're going to go up to the brush preferences. You can see the little home square and the brush preferences. And you can open this up and lo and behold, look at that. There's all the brush preferences. And if we, again, open GIMP, here's all the brush preferences. Very, very similar. So we're going to say, hey, you know what? We need a size brush that's a little bit bigger. So we're going to open up the pixels and we can test it right here. We can say, is that as big of a circle as I would like? We can choose different kinds of brushes here. Here are all the different kinds of brushes that you can select. And the hardness right here simply makes it how much or little the pen or brush is actually distributing the color that you want onto it. So if you want it to be a little more transparent, you can put it at something like 50. So let me go ahead and demonstrate what I mean. So I'll go ahead and Uh-oh, what's happening? It's not working. The reason why it's not working is because if you take a look over here, I've got background copy 2 selected, and you can see that it is making lines here, but I can't see them. This is a really, really typical problem in Photoshop, and I'll tell you why. It's so important. Not only are you editing the layer that is highlighted, but also in layers, whatever layer is on the top is the layer that you see first. Whatever layer is on the top is the layer that you see on the screen. So you can see here that I have a layer in front of the layer that I just edited. So there's 2 ways that I can see what I did. One way would be to simply select the eyeball and turn it off. And voila, there are my edits. So again, when you're in layers, whatever layer is on the top is the layer that you're going to see on the screen first, unless the eyeball, which right over here in the right hand of the screen, is clicked off, or you can simply select your layer and move it to the top. So I'm just going to repeat that one more time, even though I know we can rewind and say it. This is probably the hardest part of Photoshop, is remembering the order of layers and remembering that whatever layer you have selected and is highlighted is in fact the layer that you are editing. So again, I'm going to take this layer and put it under our first layer, and wow, it disappears because the top layer is in fact the one that I'm seeing. Now, if I was to take the eyeball and click it off, there are my edits again. So moving forward, we have background copy 2 selected, and we're using the brush tool. So what's really neat about these little triangles that you see on the corner is not only does it tell you what it is, but if you click on the triangle that's there, you can see right here that that triangle unlocks 4 to 5 more tools. It is endless. So if you're in the brush tool and you say, hey, you know what? I want to write my name. I want a pencil. I want a color replacement tool. I want a mixer brush tool. And this is where it comes into the customization. When we're talking about GIMP and Photoshop, you can customize your workspace to include the tools that work for you. Every different job has a different tool set. So as a photographer, I have a tool set for photography. As a graphic designer, you can create a tool set in your, what I call toolbox. This is kind of the toolbox right here. And so depending on what you like, you can choose. So more fun with the brush tool, shall we? So we figured out that these are our preferences here. Let's take a look at what changes if we increase the brush size and we change the hardness of it. Now let's see what happens. Aha. So we can see that now it changes the way that the brush is. Here, in this preference is all about the mode. So that gives you even more ways to use this brush. Right now, it's just on normal. We could try dissolve and see what happens. Look at the edges of that. Okay. So I won't get too far into all of these, but just know that you can play. You really can't ruin anything. And here's why. Because you can go back to the history and say, you know what? I didn't really like that. And it takes it away. And you say, you know what? I don't know if I like that. And you can take it away. And then if you change your mind again, you can bring it back. So those are the basics of the brush tool and opening up a new file that's customizable in Photoshop. So now I'm going to demonstrate the same thing, but using a photo and describe the tools in the left-hand side. So here we go. All right, so to get to this image, the first thing that I did was go into File and Open. So instead of New this time, we're going to just open an image that already exists. So we click Open and we go into our drive. This brings up the little Finder window. And this particular image happens to be sitting in my Extreme hard drive. And first, I'm going to open up the one that my students selected from the famous artist. So we'll go ahead and select it, click Open, and voila, it opens, just like you see back here. Okay, so I just opened the exact same shot. Then I will open the other piece by doing the same thing, File, Open, because it's already a file. It doesn't need to be new. It's already a file. I click Open. I go into my hard drive. Again, here on the left-hand side is basically where all your information is, your desktop, your documents, your downloads, but I'm working off of my solid state hard drive, which is the Extreme SSD. I go into my files. You can see that I've named all my files just like I talked about earlier so that I can find them very, very easily, okay? So I'm not gonna open it because I already have. And here is the image that we're going to work with. So step one, let's get back into layers again. As you can see in my layers on the right-hand side, it says background and we have a little lock. Because this photograph is a JPEG, the reason other than editing that we want other layers is that JPEG files can corrupt. If you're not shooting in RAW, JPEG only has so much room for editing. So for instance, have you ever on your telephone had an image that you made, you edited it and sent it to someone, and as time goes by, one day you say, oh, I really love this photo, I want to print it out, and you go to print it and it's all pixelated. The reason why it's pixelated is because JPEG files degrade the more that you edit them. So by first making several layers to work on, you're not corrupting the original file and ruining it. Whereas if you're shooting in RAW in photography, there's a lot more room, a lot more data for you to edit the actual image. But we're going to work with a JPEG because that's mostly what people have here. So let's move forward. And I'm sorry, I just skipped one little piece. I'm going to go backward for just a second. For those of you who don't know how to get media from your phone or professional camera to your computer. If you're using your phone, you can use Google Drive or Google Photo or Apple Photo. iPhone users can use AirDrop. Androids can simply connect with a cable. If you're using a more professional camera, then you'll have an SD card and you'll either need a reader, or sometimes newer computers now have the SD card reader embedded into the actual body of the computer, okay? I've added a link here that anyone can click if you feel confused about how to download your images onto the computer from your phone or a camera. You can click this link here and that will get you to a place where you can. So let's go back to Photoshop. We've downloaded our images, we've backed them up on the hard drive, and now we've opened them up in Photoshop. Hooray! So because the background is locked, step one always, let's duplicate that layer 3 times. So there's 1, and then there's 2, and then there's 3. So those of you who know what these layers are going to be, you're welcome to go ahead and name them right from the beginning. I usually wait to name these, and you can name them simply by clicking them twice like this. And you can see it's blue, and now we can change name right here. And the beauty of that is that as you're working on layers, if you don't like something, you can either delete it, go back in the history and take it away, or if you like something, but you want to have options to add or delete certain things in the image, you can just name it that very thing. And I'll show you, I'll demonstrate that. So we leave the background locked, and I'm going to start with the layer on the top, because if you remember, in Photoshop and in GIMP, whatever layer is on the top is the layer that you're seeing on the screen. So even though all these eyeballs are on, I'm only seeing really the top layer because none of these are transparent. So we worked with the brush a little bit, but what we're trying to do is achieve this image. So one of the first things that we're going to do is take a good look at the image and think, all right, well, obviously this is not a black background. So let's deal with that first. And it's a black and white image. So wow, okay, it's a black and white image. So let's start there. We're on the background copy. And now because I know what we're going to do with it, I'm going to name that black and white. Okay. So how do we change an image from color to black and white? Well, we go up to our trusty tabs here in Photoshop, and we go into, you'd think you'd go into edit, but you don't go into edit, you go into image because we're working with an image. So in the image tab, you can clearly see there's mode, and that includes grayscale, all the different color channels that you can use. When we're working in photos, we usually start with RGB color. If you're doing something like a pamphlet or a flyer for print, CMYK is normally what you would use. The bits I would stick with 8. This just gives more room for editing. And you don't really need to worry about that. I've stayed on 8 bits all of the time that I've been a photographer. So you'll be all right. It's not until you need something like more space that applies. So back to mode. And then adjustments is next. Adjustments is what we're looking for. In the adjustments menu, you'll get all the things that you need to adjust the photo. Brightness and contrast, levels and curves, exposure, vibrance, and we're probably not going to do any of these because it looks like the photo was exposed well, the edges are crisp, the exposure looks like it's right on. You know, you look normally when you're exposing a photograph, you look at the skin tone and see if the skin tone is correct. And if it is, you don't need to change the brightness or contrast. It's exposed well. But we're looking for black and white. And lo and behold, look at that. There is a black and white tab right there, and it's as simple as clicking it, and hey, there's black and white. Now, because it's Photoshop, we have all these different settings here. Although black and white is simply grayscale, there's a lot of black and whites that include things like color tonation. Sometimes they have more yellow, sometimes they have more red. If you want more contrast in your image, you can do things like add more red and so on. But we won't get too far into that right now. So now we've got a black and white image. Great. So we're already ahead of the game. Look at that. We've got a black and white image. It's wonderful. We love it. So what we noticed is that we really need to take care of these walls here. They're not black and we need them to be. So now that we've worked on this black and white layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hop down to background copy 2, and I'm going to make that one black and white too. And if you notice when I click down on background copy 2, you're not seeing the color version. Well, why? Because you're clicked on the layer that's below the top layer. So our two choices are we can either drag the layer up to the top, or we can simply just turn off the eyeball. And there it is again. That's the top layer, turning off the eyeball. And because in Photoshop, whatever layer you're working on is the layer that is highlighted, now we're going to go back and make the photo black and white again. So that is image, adjustments, and then down to black and white. All right, great job. So now we have two black and white versions, but because I want to leave the top black and white one kind of alone, I'm going to work on the second version. So earlier we used the brush to go in and make some lines. So when it comes to photographs, there's two ways that you can address turning this black. We're about to just turn this whole background black. There's two ways to address it. One would be like old school photography, where you use a burn or a dodge tool. And they do have burning and dodging, just like the old. As you can see, here's the dodge tool. And earlier, like I said, you go ahead and double click on there and hey, look at that. There's a burn tool, a dodge tool, and a sponge tool. That's kind of old school darkroom stuff. Will it do the same thing? Yeah, mostly, but you still have the image underneath. And what we really want is a nice black wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the brush tool. So we're going to just go a little further. So we click the brush tool and we're going to make the hardness all the way up to 100 because we want full coverage. We're going over white and that's going to make a huge difference. As we pull our brush down, we can see this little tiny circle here. I think I might want it just a little bit bigger so I get more coverage. So let's see, we turn up the size and hey, look at that. We've got a pretty large brush now. Okay, so the last thing that I didn't show you the last time we opened the brush is the color. How do you select the color? Most of the things are all up here that have to do with the brush, the opacity, which means how much you can see through it. Is it transparent or is it opaque? The flow, how much paint is coming out of the brush. Smoothing is all about, does it go with the things that you've just painted it onto? And is it a smooth transition between the surface you've painted it on? So those are all of those things, but how about color? If you come down to our little toolbox here, you can see that there are two colors. The top one that has the white highlight around it is where you click. And check that out. Now you've got the color picker. You can pick any color you want, or if you're trying to specifically match a color on the image, you can simply drag the little color picker and look at this great little dropper. You can pick the exact color that you're trying to match. So in this case, it's going to be this black. So we say, okay, and just a little side segment here. Here is all the color numbers. So anytime that you say make a logo or you're trying to fix an image and you need to know exactly what that color is, you can choose the color picker and hover over it and take a look, and it will give you the numbers right here on the screen of what their number color code is so that you can always select the right color. So I'm going to go back to the black and say, okay, and then check it out. Here we go. Okay. All right. So I'm going to cover up that little light spot because that didn't really look great. And I'm going to go back to the other photo before I get too far. And it looks like the floor and the mirror and all of that behind it, there's a little bit of a light patch, which we can add later, but pretty much the whole background is indeed black. So because the young ladies sitting here are also wearing black, I'm not going to get too close to their heads yet. We'll do that in the next session when I teach levitation. We'll get closer and I'll show you how to select those things and mask them. But we're going to get about as close as we can. So I went a little bit too far here and kind of went over the area of the floor, maybe I did. And if I don't like it, there's a few ways that I can handle that, okay? I could erase it. I could go back in my history. If you see there, oh, there it is. Now I've gone back. Maybe I want to go back even further. Okay, so that's another way to go ahead. And there's one other way to go back. And on a Mac, that is Command Z. I know you can't see me pressing that, but Command Z will also take you back in history to change that. Okay, so we just have a couple of minutes left, and I want to finish up with copying and pasting something. So as you can see, we've done all this work. What's really important is to go up to File and Save, okay? Now you can either save on your computer or to the Creative Cloud. I usually save on my computer in case the internet here in Taos is not working, which that happens a lot. You can tell it what you want to save as, and this is really, really important. Right here asks you, where are you saving it to? So obviously, if you click on here, it will give you all the different locations. Here's my hard drive. That's where I'm going to save this Photoshop file to, because then it won't slow my computer down. I'm going to call this 2023 _3 _ black and white image. Okay. And then the other piece that's important is here you see format. So when you're saving the actual Photoshop file, these are your choices. If you simply just want to make a copy of this without all these embedded information, then you say, I want a copy of that. And you can say, I don't need the layers. I don't need the embedded profile. What I need is something to show someone online, say for a meeting or something like that. Then you would save either a JPEG, which is really, really popular, easy to use, or you could do a Photoshop PDF, which is very easy to read online. So those are copies of your actual file versus a regular save of the Photoshop file, which includes all of the layers. So I'm going to save this actual Photoshop file. It's going to ask me what the format options are, and now it's saved. So lastly, before we wrap up this little tech bit, I'm going to show you quickly how to go ahead and grab something in Photoshop. You see that I'm clicking between windows. I could put this image in the other one, but I prefer to have separate windows to keep my files more clean and easy to work on. So now over here in the tool side, as you can see, every time we hover over something, it tells us what they are. This is the rectangular marquee tool. It's one of my favorite things to use. So as you can see, we just have the background. So we'll quickly make a duplicate layer. Because it's locked, it won't let us work on it anyway. In the background copy, I'm going to take the rectangle tool and I'm simply going to select this entire area right here, because I'm going to try to get a hold of this mirror in the next picture. Once I have the marching ants, I go into the center and I press Command, copy. You see that little scissor there? It's copying that image. Another way that you can do it is you can simply go up to here and you can copy it also and go back. You see the cut, copy, and merged, but I just like to do it from here. So now I'm going to Command copy. I'm going to hop over to the other side, and on the layer that is selected right here on background copy 2, and this is going to make its own layer. Watch what happens on the right-hand side. Command V, and it says, are you sure you want to convert the colors? This is a color space. And I say, absolutely, let's do it. And there it is. Now you can see that that's very tiny. Why? Well, because it's a PNG in a phone photo that one of the kids screenshotted from their phone and then sent it to me. Well, how do we make it bigger so that it matches the actual screen? We go into Edit, we scroll down, and we say Free Transform. And as you can see, now we're given a box around it. And we can simply just drag the corner. Now, as you can see, this is not staying all together. I don't particularly like that. I want to go ahead and lock it. So I'm going to Command Z and go back to make sure that I get the original. And then if you remember, up here is basically all of the things, all of the different ways that you can tweak the tools that you have selected here. So if you notice, there's this little tiny paperclip looking thing that maintains the aspect ratio. So if you click on that, what happens is it locks it so that when you drag it, it stays all together, that you're not deforming the image. So I'm going to try to make this about the size of the girls that are sitting there. And I'm going to do that by simply looking at them while I'm enlarging it. So I think we're about close there. So using the move tool, I'm going to move it out of the way and make this just a little bit smaller. Okay. And so now we have this whole nother layer, and you can see that it's demonstrated here by layer 1. Remember again, if I need to just see the other picture, I can simply click the eyeball and it disappears. Click the eyeball and it disappears. So we're going to wrap this up by me simply showing you how to take this and erase a little bit of the edge, because ultimately what I'm trying to get after is the mirror. I'm trying to get the mirror, because if you see in this image, they actually don't have a mirror, and I'm going to have to Photoshop that mirror into the image. So turning on this layer one more time, I'll go over to our trusty tools. Oh, and you know what? I just realized that this is not the layer that is selected. So I absolutely have to select layer 1, which I can now double click and rename as famous photo. Okay, so I know what that is now. So back over to our tools and check this cute little eraser tool out. So we click on that. And we look up at the top, and again, it gives us a brush size. It gives us the kind of brush, the opacity, the flow, but I want full erasing. So I'm going to go right here. And as you can see, now I'm erasing part of this image, the part that I don't want actually, so that I can just simply grab the mirror and bring it into the photo. So I'm going to show you one other way to make parts of the image disappear, and that includes the magic wand tool. We love the magic wand tool. Again, tool on the left-hand side, any way to adjust it on the top. So it tells you the tolerance. The tolerance makes it so that it sticks to edges more or less. So let's try it. We go into this piece right here. And it selects all of this, as opposed to taking the eraser and erasing it all. Let's see what happens if I change the tolerance to say 35. Let's see what happens then. Whoa, now it's selected all of this. So we obviously don't want it to be that high. Let's try something like 5 and see what happens. So now we select that again, and maybe that's not what we want. If we would do that and we would press delete, then it would delete all the things that it's selected. It's just another way to get more of a crisp line along this, because if you have a brush and you're using an eraser brush, that means that, you know, it's round. And so you're going to have rounded edges that you're erasing on. So because we use the little magic wand, we just need to do a little light cleanup here, which is really easy to do across here. Okay. So just to wrap this up, I am going to go ahead and make the size of this just a little bit smaller so that you can actually see the whole thing. Make the size of that a little bit smaller so that you can see it. Okay, and now this. All right, so everyone can see what we're getting at and how we begin getting there. And in the next session that I teach, we're going to talk about levitation and how you use Photoshop in this similar way to create levitation. Lastly, I will share this information. If any of you have questions or concerns, or you just need some help, you can contact me, Heather Lynn Sparrow, at my telephone number or at truekids1.org, and I'd be happy to help. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. Have a glorious day.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you so much, everybody. It's so nice to meet you all. Did I do all right?
It was good. Thank you.
All right. Well,
All
we'll
right.
see you next Wednesday.
Yes.
All right. Take care. Have a beautiful day. Bye.
Bye-bye.